Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? Where do we come from? Mystery, mystery. Life is a riddle and a mystery. Where do we come from? Where are we going? Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going?
Good morning. My name is David Jones, and my pronouns are he, him, and his. I'm a member of the worship committee, and I will be your worship associate this morning. Whoever you are, whomever you love, wherever you are in your life's journey, you are welcome here. Welcome to this virtual service of the Unitarian Society of New Haven. We are a diverse, multi-generational faith community that inspires lives of compassion and generosity, nurtures spiritual growth, cultivates transformative connections, and creates a more just world. This is a congregation that believes Black lives matter, that every person has the right to affirm their own gender identity, and that all people are inherently worthy. We acknowledge that our sanctuary sits on the land traditionally that of the Quinnipiac and other Native people. As a congregation, we seek to heal the wounds of the past and present in ongoing work of reconciliation. If you're joining us for the first time, we're so glad you decided to spend this time with us. We meet electronically for now, but we know we will be together again in person. The email address of the membership team is membership@usnh.org, and you can visit usnh.org to find out more about us. There will be a Zoom meeting for newcomers immediately following the service. Now let us settle in, take a relaxing breath, and let us worship together.
The call to worship today is All That We Have Been, All That We Will Become by Leslie Ahuva Fales. All that we have been separately and all that we will become together is stretched out before us and behind us like stars scattered across a canvas of sky. We stand at the precipice, arms locked together like tandem skydivers, working up the courage to jump. Tell me, friends, what have we got to lose? Our fear of failure? Our mistrust of our own talents? What have we got to lose? A poverty of the spirit? The lie? that we are alone? What wonders await us in the space between the first leap and the moment our feet, our wheels, however we move our bodies across this precious earth, touch down softly on unknown soil? What have we got to lose that we can't replace with some previously unimaginable joy? Blessed are you, Spirit of life, who has sustained us, enlivened us, and enabled us to reach this moment. Give us courage in our leaping and gratitude in our landing, and share with us in the joy of a long and fruitful ministry together. Welcome to this time of worship.
Our chalice lighting this morning is by Christine Robinson. We gather this hour as people of faith, with joys and sorrows, gifts and needs. We light this beacon of hope, sign of our quest for truth and meaning, in celebration of the life we share together. Covenant lies at the center of how Unitarian Universalists gather in community. We are united not by a particular set of beliefs, but by the promises we make about how we will be together, how we will treat each other, and how we will seek to mend relationships when we fall short of our aspirations. While the following words express our intentions in writing, our true covenant lives and breathes in our actions. Please join me now in reciting the words that appear on your screen. We covenant together to create and nurture a culture of respect and kindness, and to engage in the spiritual and everyday practice of loving more generously. To this end, we will strive to be open, value differences, listen deeply, use kind language, speak our truths, work with conflict, and seek humor and joy.
Some time ago, there were 4 friends who were part of a Unitarian Universalist congregation, not too far from here. Their names were Ryan, Toby, Sandy, and Jerry. Now, Ryan was a ball player professionally, and Toby was a clothing designer. Sandy was a lifelong social justice activist, and Jerry was a farmer. There came a time in their lives and in the life of their congregation where they were called to go into a great long time, over a year, of isolation. During this time of isolation, Ryan got very, very nervous. She had been a ball player for her whole life, and suddenly she could not play on a team. Suddenly she could not be around her teammates or interact with fans. She was at herself by her home for the good of all, but really, really worried for herself. So, as she sat there, she began to think, what can I do to make the most of this time of isolation? So one day, Ryan was sitting there thinking about what she could do, and she began to toss a ball back and forth between her hands. Then she grabbed another one, and she began to toss that ball back and forth between her hands. And suddenly she remembered that in her childhood she had always loved those clowns at the circus who could juggle. And so she started trying to learn how to juggle. And bit by bit, as the time of isolation went on, she got better and better at it until she could juggle like a pro. Meanwhile, at Toby's house, Toby had done these designer shows, these lines, and had done shows around the world. And Toby was very worried. How can I design my beautiful clothes when nobody is around to come see them? Well, Toby then heard a call that went out over social media. What people need in this time of isolation is masks. So Toby went and studied patterns and experimented with his sewing machine at home until Toby became an expert at creating beautiful, beautiful cloth masks. Masks that had people's names on them. Masks that were monogrammed. Masks that showed beautiful underwater scenes. And soon Toby had figured out a way to safely deliver these masks all over the whole town and began to have a new passion to dedicate his life to during this time of isolation. Meanwhile, elsewhere, Sandy, who had been this wonderful activist and had always been so good at getting people together into action when there was a need for it, realized that for their whole life, they had really never taken the time to study and learn the history and the interconnectedness of these issues that they felt so strongly about. So Sandy began to make a whole bunch of purchases on bookshop.org and got a whole bunch of wonderful new books that really explained not only the issues, but the connection between these issues. And Sandy spent days and weeks and months reading and learning and feeling renewed in their energy for action. Now Jerry, who was a farmer, actually barely noticed that the time of isolation was happening. Because Jerry had always been somebody who really liked coming to the services at the Unitarian Universalist Church, enjoyed the conversations to a certain degree, but didn't get too involved in the big group activities. And so Jerry, throughout this time of isolation, just kind of quietly worked their farm, planted seeds, took care of these plants, took out the weeds, and finally, around the time that Jerry was getting ready to plant in the second year of isolation, an announcement came out across the entire world that the time of isolation was coming to a close. The entire congregation, the entire town, the entire nation, in fact, the whole world began to rejoice. But with that celebration came a little bit of hesitation. Ryan was very excited about playing on a team again and getting back out and playing her favorite sport. But she wondered, during the whole last year, I haven't played ball. All I've done is juggle. Toby said, what if the only thing I'm good for now is making masks? What if I've forgotten about how to make beautiful, new, creative clothing? Sandy said, what if I'm really good at reading, but I'm no longer good at organizing and getting people together? What if I've forgotten? And Jerry, well, Jerry just quietly hoed and raked between the rows of new seedlings. Well, on the first day of the ball season, Ryan went out and went into the stands and crack, hit a home run right away and said, oh, it's just like riding a bicycle. I haven't forgotten anything. I'm still pretty good at this. But right when that happened, Ryan heard a small child out in the audience crying. And that child was crying, and Ryan said, I've got an idea of how I can cheer this child up. And Ryan, after running the bases and scoring that run, went over and picked up 3 balls and juggled. Oh, and juggled for that child. And that child stopped crying right away and began giggling and laughing. And Ryan said, not only can I still play ball, but I have a new skill to share with the world. I think it's going to be okay. And Toby began to work with his sewing machine, and he not only kept making masks because people kept needing to be careful, but Toby began to design entire lines of clothing where the masks perfectly matched the clothes, and became famous around the world once again as designer of full suits including matching masks. And Toby said, you know what? I think it's going to be okay. Sandy, same thing happened. When the need arose, Sandy began to organize people into action, into protest, into actions that helped change laws, and used all the knowledge from all the books that they had read during the time of isolation to move all these causes forward. And Sandy said, I think it's going to be okay. And meanwhile, on the first day that everybody got back together, back at their Unitarian Universalist congregation, Ryan could be found juggling in the social hall. Toby had masks and suits and pants and shirts for everyone. Sandy had all kinds of announcements of upcoming actions. And there, in the middle of the table, in the social hall, where the snack usually was, Jerry had placed a beautiful pile of fresh, delicious fruits and vegetables. Blessings to you, my friends.
Good morning. My name is Pat Trotter, and I'm a member of the Pastoral Care Team. Let us now turn our attention to the concerns of this community. I now invite you to join me in holding in our hearts the joy and sorrow of those around you. Today, some woke with a sorrow so great they asked for the help of this community to carry it. Others woke with a joy so great it must be shared. Anne Levison asked us to please hold in your heart Kathy Wilson, who will be undergoing serious surgery on April 22nd. From Jane Platt, my brother, John Hitchcock, who has been at rehab in New Hampshire for about 1.5 years after suffering a heart attack, has taken a turn for the worse. Please keep my family in your thoughts. Sharon McLean asked us to remember Winfried Rembert, a long-term friend of USNH, who died peacefully at home on March 31st. An old man of 75 whose powerful body had just worn out. At the website of the Arts Council of Greater New Haven, you can find a beautifully written and illustrated article about the memorial service that is titled Winfried Rembert, who spoke truth to power through his art and is laid to rest. Winfried's masked and socially distanced funeral service was held at First Calvary Baptist Church on April 7th. He hugged us, he loved us, he shared his painful life stories, and he was our teacher. My husband Paul lost a lifelong friend, Bill Capinzi, a week ago. Bill's first son and our first daughter were born a few weeks apart, and our families spent many happy times together. Please keep Paul and Bill's family in your thoughts. For the joys and sorrows that haven't been spoken, but which remain in the silent sanctuaries of our hearts, we bear witness.
Our meditation this morning is written by Dag Hammarskjöld. I am being driven forward into an unknown land. The pass grows steeper, the air colder and sharper. A wind from my unknown goal stirs the strings of expectation. Still the question, shall I ever get there? There where life resounds, a clear, pure note in the silence.
Hi there, my name is Robin Genzano, and my husband Richard and I joined USNH in 2016 after a friend from Summer Theater, who happens to be a member of USNH, dropped enough hints to pique our curiosity and get us to attend a Sunday service. When we moved to a previous apartment just 10 minutes away, stopping in for a service sounded like a no-brainer. One service turned into another, and before we knew it, we began coming to the service on a weekly basis. I was fortunate enough to grow up here at USNH, and as a result, many of my personal values were adopted by learning from congregation members around me. From past ministers to RE teachers, USNH helped give me the values that I live by every day. So when our daughter Leona was born, we became dedicated to giving her the same loving and accepting experience I was exposed to as a child in this congregation. USNH is and always has been a place where you can be yourself without fear. And we love that our daughter gets to grow up in that sort of environment. When we were welcomed at USNH, it was with open arms, not outstretched hands. We've never had a lot to give financially, and we believe that giving time, expertise, and love is every bit as valuable as giving money. That being said, we have always prioritized this community when we're able to contribute financially. This year, we're proud to make our pledge to USNH because we recognize that this community needs us now more than ever, and that every little bit can make a difference.
This congregation is full of people like Robin and Rich, who give their time and talent as well as their treasure. We are getting even closer to our goal of $490,000 and 100% participation for this year's stewardship campaign. If you haven't had a chance to complete your pledge, please do so today by going to usnh.org and just click on Pledge. Our goal is to wrap up everything by April 30th. If you're still considering how much to give, think about all the ways that this community supports your values, from religious education for our children and youth, to our social justice programs, and everything beyond. If you've already pledged, thank you. When you fulfill your covenant of membership this way, the volunteers and staff working on next year's budget can plan wisely on the congregation's behalf. I know I, for one, am deeply grateful for everyone working hard to map our financial course for 2021-22. I also know that many of you are grateful for USNH and the connections you have with others in the community. It's from that place of gratitude that I invite you to give to the weekly offering. When we open our hearts to embrace what we value most, generosity is sure to follow. Thank you for your generosity.
Our reading this morning is Desert Spring by Victoria Safford. They had no idea where they were going when they left that night in the dark, without lights, without shoes, without bread, their children smothered against them so they would make no noise. They had no idea what they were getting into following this Moses, this wild-eyed one who claimed visions and made promises, but who, after all, could guarantee them nothing except death if they were caught. They had no idea, these slaves, what it could mean, this promise of land, their own country, and life abundant. Of freedom they knew nothing, except what they could taste by living in its opposite, slavery. And that taste became a hunger, and that hunger became insatiable till they were ravenous for freedom. And they went out then. But no one knows to this day whether they were led by Moses or by the outstretched arm and mighty hand of something else, of something eternal, as they would afterwards always claim. Or whether their own human, hungry will made them flee that night from Pharaoh. They went into the wilderness. There they wandered 40 years, which in those days was a lifetime. 40 was a good old age, so many of them died before getting anywhere. And many were born in the desert and grew to adulthood, knowing nothing but the journey. Not slavery, not freedom, just the going. They whined and complained and muttered, and some mutinied. For they were a stiff-necked and rebellious people. You can read it for yourself. Ungrateful people, even when manna rained down from heaven and quails were sent to feed them. Unhappy people, longing out loud even for the familiar security of Egypt, of all places, where at least they knew what to expect, as awful as it was. Impatient people, making cheap little idols and gods of metal to bargain with in secret when the traveling got hard or merely dull, and the days and years became monotonous. In the springtime we remember, the promised land is not a destination, it is a way of going. The land beyond the Jordan, that country of freedom and dignity and laughter, you carry it inside you all the while. It is planted in your mind and heart already, before you even start out. Before it even occurs to you that in order to leave that life in Egypt, the intolerable bondage of that life, what you need to do is to stand up and walk forward. Thus ends the morning reading.
In recent weeks, we've been reflecting on how the pandemic has changed, well, everything. The world as we knew it no longer exists, and we're no longer the people we once were. We took time to mourn and to release the way things were. Today, we look ahead, having released the grief and made space for what's to come. What exactly do we want to bring in? In the reading from Reverend Victoria Safford, she notes that the Promised Land isn't a destination, but a way of going. As it was with Moses and his people coming out of Egypt, so it will be with us when we come out of COVID. We need to relearn the world, and I hope relearn it in better ways. Instead of griping about how boring it is to eat the manna that heaven keeps sending, we can keep coming back to gratitude for having our needs met. Instead of making idols of our institutions, we can ask where the sacred is calling us right now. We haven't been in the desert for 40 years, but we've felt the monotony of undifferentiated time. We've had to quarantine ourselves, staying away from everyone except those in our innermost circle. We've longed for the familiarity of the before times, even when that time kept us beholden to soul-crushing realities. When we cross our River Jordan, when we begin to gather in groups again and travel further than a handful of miles, we won't be the same people as when we started on this journey. Reverend Leslie Fales wrote in today's call to worship, "All that we have been separately and all that we will become together is stretched out before and behind us like stars scattered across a canvas of sky." What have we got to lose, she continues? Our fear of failure? Our mistrust of our own talents? What have we got to lose? A poverty of the spirit? The lie that we are alone? As we move into all that we will become together, what are some of the things you want to remain in the past? For example, I believe we can't go backwards on access to healthcare. Something as basic as free COVID testing, a critical tool in protecting public health, has demonstrated how access affects everyone's well-being. We've also seen how lack of access in communities of color has had an impact on death rates from the coronavirus. This past year has also brought the killing of Black and brown bodies into razor-sharp relief. This week, just outside of Minneapolis, Daunte Wright was killed during a traffic stop before the trial of Derek Chauvin could even finish. Between the drafting of this sermon and the recording of it, I've had to add the name of Adam Toledo, a 13-year-old Latino boy who was killed by police in Chicago. At this point, we must acknowledge that law enforcement in this country is ineffective at best and deadly at worst. It was built on the infrastructure of slave patrols. With such DNA, is the way it functions really a surprise? Police are asked to perform roles far better suited to others, such as social workers, mental health professionals, housing advocates, and more. Instead of further militarizing police forces, which sets up a war mentality in which community members are given the role of enemy combatant, we need to reallocate funding so that money addresses the problems we have, not the problems we create through over-policing. I'm committed to learning more about abolition, which I'm increasingly convinced is the only humane way forward. Abolition is gaining attention in this country right now, though it's far from new. Joseph Smith talked about it in 1844 while running for president. The contemporary abolition movement goes back to at least 1974. I first heard about it in the 1990s, and now it's picking up movement because there have been so many extrajudicial killings by police, and because the prison-industrial complex and its racist roots have drained the life out of too many communities of color. As we do the work to leave such toxic messes behind, I want us to bring forward the important lessons that we have learned over the last 13 months. I hope we remember that we wore masks and quarantined and got vaccinated, not just for ourselves, but also as a way to protect everyone in our communities, especially the most vulnerable among us. We washed our hands and used sanitizer like it was going out of style. We maintained 6-foot distances and asked people to cover their noses as well as their mouths, and forewent hugs and visits with loved ones as an expression of deep care. I hope we remember how we felt at our most scared, isolated, lonely, frustrated, and end of the rope stressed. Not to stay in those places, but so we can respond to others with more kindness, more connection, more gentleness, more understanding, and more help. I hope we remember the frontline workers, whether they delivered medical care or groceries, who have been under such profound strain, and the remarkable researchers who delivered vaccines so swiftly, and the people in power whose lies and delays and political narcissism currently has a death count of over 565,000 people in the US, and it rises every day. We need to remember, because we can never let that happen again. If we're going to build something better coming out of this pandemic, we need to practice something better. Going forward, I plan to practice loving up my friends like never before. I want to make it one of my highest priorities. I want to take vacations based on the people I'll be with. I want to reignite handwritten correspondences. I want to strew smiley faces throughout my emails without worrying what someone might think of it. I want to tell people I love them as easily as the feeling rises within me. In all that we will become, I want to ensure that people have room to acknowledge the deep trauma we're living through. The effects won't fade even once everyone's vaccinated, especially for our children and youth who will be shaped by COVID-19. We've been in this pandemic for over a year already, and it's naive to think that it won't take at least that long to process it, probably much longer. While we're in the middle of trauma, our brains can't even begin to integrate our experiences. We need to remind ourselves that we're going to need time to heal. I also want to practice spaciousness. Life's pace has changed dramatically under COVID-19, sometimes intensifying, sometimes stretching languidly. I don't want to default back into racing around all the time, jumping from this pandemic into the epidemic of overwork and harried schedules. I mean, one boom of these Zoom meetings is that They came with spectacularly short commute times. And I've so appreciated just having that little bit of breathing room. What wonders, the poet asks us, await us in the space between the first leap and the moment our feet, our wheels, however we move our bodies across this precious earth, touch down softly on unknown soil. What have we got to lose that we can't replace with some previously unimaginable joy? What previously unimaginable joy do you want to practice in the months and years to come? What stars do you see stretched out before and behind you? Are you willing to lose the lie that each of us is alone? Together, may we find meaningful ways to refill this beautiful, fragile cup of life, and then have the courage to drink deep. Amen, and blessed be.
We extinguish this chalice, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
Friends, what have we got to lose? What have we got to lose by envisioning a better world and then working together to build it? What previously unimaginable joy are we missing out on? All that we have been and all that we will become can form the foundation of the beloved community. In the words of Assata Shakur, all we have to lose are our chains. Go forth, friends, with courage and with kindness, and be a blessing to the world. Amen.